Welcome to the Date Forever podcast. Keep your relationship fueled up with strategies discovered by couples and experts. Because at Fuel Collective, we believe better relationships will equal a better world. You are about to discover specific insights and tools that cost little or nothing to implement to help you date forever. And now, here are your hosts, a couple who always have a half-packed suitcase and a date night in the calendar, Sammy and Nathan Yeager.
Hello and welcome to Date Forever. In this week's episode, we're chatting about healing from past sexual traumas, building deep intimacy with yourself and your partner, undertaking a sexual exploration journey, and the different seasons of your sex lives. But before we jump into that, Sammy, what's been fueling you up this week?
Oh my gosh, what a week.
Oh, it's been big, hasn't it?
Yeah, we've spent the last week in Northern Territory visiting Uluru, previously known as Ayers Rock, in the Red Centre of Australia.
Yeah.
So I was on a business retreat with around 50 other women who hang out in the digital business space, learning, growing, connecting, and it was really amazing and also fun. It was so nourishing and really fueled me up in so many ways, like in terms of my career and business and my own self-development and my relationship with myself. I learned a few things about myself, and I was able to connect with, in real life, hug, touch, kiss, not in a creepy way, people that I've been connecting with online for over a year. So it was amazing to put some real faces to real names and see that they had a body outside of above their shoulders from the Zoom room. Yeah. What about you, Nath? What fueled you up?
So the big part of the trip that really fueled me up was doing some solo travel, even though that we were coming together in the evenings, basically just to sleep together. That was about it. But yeah, I think one of the big things about doing solo travel is that you really need to make every decision. Like, you get to choose what you want to do during the day. You get to choose what you eat. You get to choose. And yeah, it really is about making every single decision throughout the day. And so it does take a little bit of energy and effort and self-exploration to actually tap into what do you really want to be doing when there's nobody else that is around to please or do anything else with.
You did some cool things on your own, didn't you?
Yeah, I did some great things. And I did some things that I wouldn't have done with you either, or that you wouldn't have wanted to do with me. So
yeah, you definitely wouldn't have got me on a Segway tour for 5 hours.
It wasn't that long.
But you seemed to have a blast.
Yeah, I did really have a blast. And yeah, and just tap into some of the things that I really enjoy doing.
I know that my first big solo travel trip back in 2014 to Vietnam for a couple of months was huge for my personal development in terms of being able to really learn how to trust myself, and that when things didn't go to plan or didn't go right, that I could get resourceful to solve those things. But like you said, yeah, to really tap into well, hold on a second, what do I want? What do I want to do? Where do I want to go? And getting in touch with that. So yeah, I love solo travel. As much as I love traveling with you, it's also amazing to travel solo.
Yeah, I think you just learn so much about yourself when you do that.
Well, talking about solo, as we hightail into this week's episode talking about alone time and self-discovery and masturbation. So
let's jump into it.
Today we've got Azaria Menezes joining us. Azaria is the Pussy Fairy, and she's a trauma-informed sex and intimacy coach that works with women, mums, and couples to figure out what that thing is that's holding them back in the bedroom. She supports folk to get back to feeling turned on, ecstatic, orgasmic in and out of the bedroom. Azaria supports her clients to reignite that spark back into their sexuality or relationship so they can fall more in love with themselves and or each other. She also hosts a podcast, Getting Intimate, where she brings practical ways to invite more pleasure into your body, relationship, and sex life. Welcome to the show, Azaria.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, no worries. It's great to have you.
The Pussy Fairy. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Me too.
So my hunch is that someone gets curious about the field of sex and intimacy because they had an experience.
Always.
Take us there. How did you end up as the Pussy Fairy?
Yeah, I love this question. I get it so much. And honestly, why am I the Pussy Fairy? Number one, I love pussy. Number two, pussy makes all of the choices in my life. Like, pussy is the decision maker here. And so when I get to sprinkle my pussy magic on there, it's really just sprinkling all of the joy and the deep connection and the deep vibrancy I'm channeling from my body and my pussy into other people's relationships and sex lives. So that's where the Pussy Fairy name came from. But my sexual journey started at a really young age. Like, I was always super interested in sexuality, always asking my parents all of the awkward questions. Like, I was that kid who wanted answers to everything. And they were like, holy shit, why do we have this child? I was directed to books and just like doing my own research and learning about it in a very kind of science-based way. And when I spoke to my mom about it, she was really connected to her spirituality. She was really connected to Tantra. And so I really learned from a young age what it meant to understand my body and my sexuality from like a science-based view and also a spiritual kind of point. So that was really, really, really incredible for me growing up. And I also experienced childhood sexual abuse and in my teenage years as well. And so that was the moment where I felt so disconnected from my sexuality. And every sexual experience was just either feeling super performative or just really hollow and empty. And I was like, okay, whatever y'all are talking about, mind-blowing orgasms and explosive this and explosive that, like, that ain't happening in my world. I don't know where it is, but I want some of that. Like, I know that even though I've had these limiting sexual experiences, there is a possibility for me to thrive and feel good. And that was just the beginning of my journey to sexual healing and eventually just feeling so, so, so good in my body, feeling like I'm truly in my sexual enjoyment and deep thriving and deep pleasure. And here I am, the Pussy Fairy.
So I'm very sorry to hear that you had that sexual assault experience. And unfortunately for people and women, that's not uncommon. And that's really crappy. But I'm really glad that you're here to help share the crossroad from that and how you've come to a place of healing and where you can really enjoy that part of your life. So take us back. What did you do to start your healing journey?
Yeah. So a lot of it really started with slow nervous system regulation because my body was still feeling really dysregulated. I did a lot of therapy. I did a lot of counseling, lots of coaching. And then I really connected to my spiritual practice of Tantra. So I really just started with yoga. Yoga is another lineage or limb of Tantra. It's not just always about like the sex and the sex positions. And so I started with yoga and I just started to really just connect back to my body, starting to get really embodied in what it means to experience sensation in my body, to experience like relaxation, to experience what it even means to be in my body, right? Because as you can imagine, the journey into a thriving sexuality really begins with having awareness around what is even happening in your body. And even if you don't have any major trauma in your life or any limiting experiences around your sexuality, we're growing up and living in a world that really takes us out of our body most of the time with our jobs, with the relationships that we have, with our phones, technology, with our lifestyles. We're really busy. There's not a lot of opportunity to just really slow down and even just notice your breath, right? So this is something that was a really important part in healing my sexuality, was learning what it meant to come home in my body, learning what it meant to create safety in my own body, and learning what it means to actually notice the sensations that are coming up in my body. And then from that space, I started exploring more fun practices and practices that really allowed me to cultivate some of that like orgasmic and sexual energy in my body, and it just grew from there.
So Azaria, what were you doing like professionally at that time?
Yeah. So I was a yoga teacher.
Okay.
So I was teaching yoga. I was 19 when I started my healing journey, when I started taking my healing journey seriously, like when I was really invested in therapy and like in there for the long haul. And I also had my first baby. So I was just a young mom and I was teaching yoga. I was working in like the wellness industry, doing some coaching. I was also working with couples in offering tantric massages and teaching them how to do it. And it was such a beautiful time in my life, and connecting to my sexuality and my sensuality from a spiritual aspect, just weaving in like tantric methodology was so helpful because it just allowed me to connect with my sexuality as something sacred, something to celebrate, something incredible, right? And that's the thing that really allowed me to drop into it even more.
So you mentioned like the absence of orgasmic energy and like explosiveness, but like what was it that you were experiencing? Because I just want our listeners to be able to go, oh yeah, I have some of that going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the time for me, when I was disconnected from my body and disconnected from my sexuality, I was noticing things like numbness. So I didn't really feel a lot of sensation in my body and my pussy during sex. It was just, there wasn't really a lot of sensation happening at all. I really noticed that for me, it was so easy to disassociate from the sex that was happening. So it was easy to disassociate from my partner in any type of intimacy, whether it's like sexual intimacy or emotional intimacy or like any type of vulnerability. It was really easy for me to just like disassociate. Another thing that was happening for me is that after sex, I just felt so empty. Like it felt like when the sex ended, I had this overwhelming feeling of not being enough and also not receiving the thing that I initially wanted out of sex that I thought that I would get. And at the time, I didn't know what it was. And it just felt like I wasn't good enough. It just felt like I failed. It felt like I had lost something. And it wasn't something that was really, I wasn't really conscious around what it was, but I knew it felt empty and hollow. And I knew I didn't like that feeling. And so when I was feeling that, I realized that this is the moment that I really want to shift feeling like this, because I don't want this to be my whole life. And yeah, it was just one of those moments where I realized like, this isn't going to change unless I actually choose to commit to myself, commit to my body, commit to listening to my needs. It was really hard for me to express my needs in the bedroom or share what I liked and share what I didn't like, because so much of the sex that I had was based on like performative sex and based on my partner's pleasure. And for me, sex was something that in a way I was connecting to. I thought I felt empowered around my sexuality because I was choosing to, but I was also choosing to put myself in situations that weren't really supporting me to feel connected. So in a way, there was like a lot of dysregulation in my body as well as the choices I was making, because I was looking at my sex life through the lens of my trauma. I was looking at my sex life through the lens of these limiting experiences that I had. And so the point that really shifted things for me is when I just felt like there has to be more than this. I've had enough. I don't like feeling like this anymore. I don't know what's on the other side, but I'm going to try and walk towards it.
So what was the impact on your wider relationship at that point in time too?
That's a great question. So like a relationship with others?
Or with your partner?
Right. Okay. So I had a lot of partners back then. I had so many partners before I had my daughter. And I think that I never really wanted to get into relationships. I was like, like I'm just here to have fun and I don't want to get into anything intimate. Like this is not where I want to be. I just want to go in and go out. And so intimacy was something that was hard for me to be in, especially when I hadn't addressed any of the trauma that I experienced. I addressed it to like a certain point, but I hadn't really committed, right? I hadn't committed to my healing and I hadn't committed to myself. I was like, okay, like did a couple of cute counseling sessions and now we've talked about it and now we're good. But my actions and my choices and the beliefs that I had around myself obviously still showed that I was still really scared of deep intimacy. And I actually didn't know how to create intimacy in my life because it wasn't really something that I was taught either. And I think this is the thing that is really common in our society and our culture. It's like we're not really taught how to create deep intimacy, how to enjoy our pleasure, right? Like we're taught like the basic sex ed stuff and we're taught all of the like basic relationship stuff that we see either modeled from our friends, family, culture, whatever, media, anything like that. And we go out into the world and we expect all of our relationships to be amazing. And if they don't work out, it's like, oh, well, I guess I must be broken, or I guess something's wrong with me, or I guess I have too much baggage, or I'm too fucked up to have a relationship. But that's not really true, right? Like there's so much that we can actually create within our relationships and within our pleasure if we had some of that information available to us.
So in your bio, we talked about that being a trauma-informed sex and intimacy coach. And I want you to maybe give us your definition of trauma, because what you've experienced as sexual assault I know is not the only type of trauma that people experience that then cause other catalysts to experiencing some of these issues. So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at trauma, we live in a world where I don't think there's anyone in this world that isn't affected by trauma. Just living in the societies we live today, living with the media that we have around us. Trauma, to me, is really just nervous system dysregulation or really big stress cycles that happen in our life that we can't fully complete or we can't fully process. And so these patterns, these beliefs, these experiences, these stories, whatever they are, they get stuck in our system and then they just hang out there and then they can create a whole lot of havoc, or they can go unnoticed for a really long time. And then all of a sudden it blows up. So it's really anything that is causing us to feel dysregulated in our nervous system. And it can be literally anything, because we are all built so differently and we all react to different situations in different ways. And lots of different situations can affect people on different levels, depending on their ability to regulate their stress and their ability to expand their window of tolerance. So I think that everyone has experienced trauma to some degree in their life. And I don't really think that there is what I see a lot with my clients is like, oh, well, I know somebody who experienced this, but my trauma isn't really that big. So I shouldn't really be experiencing these symptoms. But I think we really need to differentiate that, because how it is affecting your body and your experience and maybe how it's affecting your life and how you feel can be so different from the next person. So I really don't think comparing trauma or like trying to find like a scale of who has more trauma, like it shouldn't be a competition, but most of us are.
What's that saying? Like whether or not you drown in 2 inches of water or 2 meters of water, you're still drowning.
Totally. That's a good one. And that's so, so true, because the way that it affects us is it can just be so unique to you and at different times in your life as well, right? Like all of a sudden you unlock this memory and you're like, holy shit, I don't know what to do with all of this. And now is the time that my body has the ability to process this and hold this, right? So it's really about looking at how can we regulate our nervous systems throughout our life? How can we understand and learn how to regulate our nervous systems and expand our window of tolerance and just like collect all of these amazing tools out there to support ourselves and each other and practice co-regulation with our partners and learn how to self-regulate, right? Because you don't have to do it all alone. It's amazing to co-regulate. Even just going to therapy is also a form of co-regulation, right? So I think the key in any type of trauma or just life in general is just understanding the signs of your body when you're moving into stress, when you're moving into feeling dysregulated, when you're moving into a trauma response, or when you're feeling triggered. And then just understanding some of the tools that really work for you and knowing that these tools can change and shift and that there's so much you can do to support yourself in this, and just checking in with yourself on a daily basis. This is why, right? Like you gotta slow down and check in with yourself so that you can really have those moments to be like, ooh, actually, you know what? This commitment is making me feel stressed, or this thing that I said yes to, or this big event actually is kind of stressing me out right now. So let's not, right? Let's take care of ourselves and regulate ourselves and take action from a place of feeling regulated.
Yeah, for sure. So you've touched on this idea of building deeper intimacy. So I guess what does deeper intimacy actually look like? And then how can we do that? What are some of the first steps that we can take to actually deepen that intimacy with a partner?
I love that so much. I think that A deeper intimacy it actually starts with you. The deeper we practice intimacy with ourselves, the more we can practice this intimacy within our relationships. And to me, deep intimacy, if we think about why intimacy feels edgy for us, it's vulnerability. And whenever we are exposed to anything that is going to put us in a state of vulnerability, whether it's our emotions or our feelings, or put us in a place where we might be rejected or feel shame or be abandoned or not accepted, all of these things just set up a big alarm in our bodies, in our brains, and are like, this is probably not where we want to walk to. And our brains want to keep us safe. Our body wants to keep us safe. So obviously it's going to create all of these excuses why we shouldn't walk towards the vulnerability and why we shouldn't walk towards that emotional risk, which is great. Awesome. Thanks, brain. And also, this is the thing that stops us from deeper intimacy. And when we start to spend time with the parts of ourselves that we want to push away, we want to hide, we want to put in a fucking corner, hope that our partner never sees it, right? Like all of these parts even these parts that we don't like about ourselves, our personality, our body, everything, right? Like the more we try to control all of these parts, the trickier it's going to be to accept and hold all of these parts in your partner. So when I say deepening your intimacy and what deepens your intimacy, it's really practicing incredible self-love and incredible self-compassion. And I'm not talking about like self-love being bubble baths and dessert and na. But it's really like, how can I love and hold space for these parts of myself that I actually try to control or push away or hide from other people, or even just like behaviors or thoughts that I have in my mind that I wouldn't share out loud with anyone in the world? Like, how can I hold space for these parts? Like, how can I create a home for these parts in my body and practice deep self-acceptance? Because when we get to play with these parts of ourselves, when we get to create a home for these parts, it's so much easier to, number one, just share ourselves with our partner and like come into that vulnerable space and acknowledge like, holy shit, this is feeling really, really fucking scary right now. And I'm actually the type of person who doesn't want to walk towards vulnerability, but I'm just going to name it and call myself out right now and still show up, right? And that is the thing that really supports us to be vulnerable and create deeper intimacy and be open towards deeper intimacy. And then when our partners do the same, it's so much easier for us to see those parts of them with so much compassion and understanding, because we hold these parts in ourselves with so much love and compassion as well.
So if someone's listening to this and they are resonating with some of those experiences for themselves, or they know that their partner has had some traumatic experiences, whether or not it's been around health or medical, or even just the way that they were brought up to see sex as something that was only for husbands and wives to procreate, or whether or not they were taught that sex is a desirable, pleasurable, fun thing to do, whatever the range of trauma might be or their hang-ups about sex, I know that often that can mean that it's incredibly challenging to even, one, think about, and two, talk about. So if someone's hearing some of this and they're like, okay, yep, we've definitely got some of that going on, what's the first step?
Yeah, I think a really great first step here is to just create. I love lists. I love creating lists. So much easier to write shit out. But really just starting to understand, what is it that makes you feel safe in the relationship, or what creates safer space for you in the relationship? What creates safer space for you in the language that your partner uses or that you use? What creates safer space in the environment? Anything like that, right? And then once you actually start to understand, what is it actually inside of my relationship, inside of intimacy, during sex, in my environment, in the way we communicate, what are some things that actually really support me to drop into my body and feel safe? That's when we can start to understand like how we can express some of those needs to our partner, right? And how we can start to understand, oh, so I really love when there is like when we have a lot of time before we make love and the space is quiet and we have time to actually connect before, because I don't really like rushing in because it makes me feel pressured, to like say yes, even though I don't even know if I'm really in the mood and if I'm not. And it might just feel like I am doing it because you want to do it and we haven't done it in a long time, things like that, right? So when we kind of figure out what it is that makes us feel relaxed and what is almost like an invitation for us to feel more centered and grounded in feeling safe, that's a really, really helpful thing to start communicating with your partner. And then your partner can do the same thing. They can also create a list in what supports them to feel safe and heard and accepted in the relationship. And then you can just like compare lists, because it's so great to actually have something that you can look at time and time again. And these things change all the time too, right? So every couple months you can make a new one and just see what's shifted for you and what is going to be supporting you in the season of your relationship. Because if we look at intimacy, if we look at sexuality, there's always, it's like we're going through different seasons. This is something that I apply in sexuality as well. When couples ask me, like, how do I communicate to my partner when I'm not in the mood and they're in the mood and our libidos are completely in a different state, and I don't want to make them feel like I'm rejecting them all the time, and they don't want to make me feel like they're always asking? I recommend just starting a conversation around the understanding that your sexuality goes through different cycles and seasons. And so your sexual summer could look like you're turned on all the time, you're super horny, you're probably a yes. If your partner's like, hey, do you want to get a little something? You're like, fuck yes, I'm in the mood, I want you, rip my clothes off, like take me now. That is a sexual summer, and our society loves to glamorize sexual summers. Like that's probably what it is in the media. Like we should be always turned on and always like a
Ready
yes.
to go.
Yeah.
Right? But like that's not the reality of things. Like let's be real here. It would be nice, but at the same time, that's so exhausting. So, and then a sexual fall would be just a slowing down, really just feeling kind of the trickling down of the high of the sexual summer. And then the winter would be very quiet. You're not really in the mood, but you do want to connect. You want some cuddling. You want to feel really connected with each other in other ways than connecting physically. And then spring is really when things start to like waken up again. You're feeling that excitement. You are feeling more creative. And so what I recommend to couples is that they start creating this language around like, oh, what season are you in right now? And then one of them could be like, oh, I'm feeling in a winter right now. And the other person's like, oh, okay, I'm kind of more moving into summer and I'm feeling more excited. And so this gives you like kind of a heads up on what's going on. And so creating lists and creating opportunities to have the language around what creates safety for you, where you're at, what you're experiencing can be so helpful to just normalize that we go through different phases and we're going to need different things to support us, depending on our stress levels, depending on how busy we are, depending on where the stage is in our relationship. Like at the beginning, like, oh my gosh, there's so much space and time sometimes for all of these things because we're just like in our hormones and we're like, yes.
And at the beginning, you're not sharing grocery lists and finances
Exactly.
and who's doing the washing. So there is more space.
Exactly. And this is such a great time to really just start building your communication around it and just sharing like, oh, like this is what I'm available for. These are where my boundaries are. This is what I have a really hard time communicating with. And this is really, really easy for me, right? And so it gets these conversations going and it really normalizes things in a healthy way. And it also creates this idea that we just go through different phases depending on what's happening in our life.
Yeah. So Azaria, I want to go back and when you talked about creating that list of what makes us feel safe, you're talking not just about like physical safety, right? You were talking about emotional, physical, mental, psychological safety.
Absolutely.
Like, how do I feel most like you're not going to hurt me in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's, we can categorize them into like, what do I feel when I'm connecting to my emotional safety? What are some of the ways I get to feel emotionally safe in this relationship or even just with myself? What are some of the ways I feel physical safety? So whether it's in my environment or whether it's some of the things that allow me to feel physically safe, whether it's like, I need a bunch of pillows underneath my body or underneath my hips for my body to relax and feel that sense of safety. So it's not always, safety can be just correlated to how your body can just feel, more relaxed and also just grounded in your own safety, whether that's emotional, mental, energetic, spiritual, physical, and mental.
So Azaria, if someone is hearing this and they're like, okay, I don't know, and they're reflecting on their past sexual experiences, how do they go about creating that list? Is it about drawing from past positive experiences, or is it about projecting into the future what you would like to experience and how you would like to feel?
So I would recommend sometimes just thinking like, what would make me feel safe right now in this moment? If you're creating your list and you're tuning into your body in this moment and you're connecting with your partner, just imagine like, what would make me feel safe right now in this moment? So rather than trying to think about the future or trying to think about the past, it can be really helpful to just think about all of the ways that will create safety for you in this moment, and then just keep adding on to the list. That can be a really helpful and easy way to think about it. And oftentimes we don't know what makes us feel safe, unfortunately, until there's a boundary that's been crossed and our body's like, oh, okay, like this is not what makes me feel safe, right? And so it doesn't always have to be like a physical boundary, but it can also just be like an emotional or energetic or just mental boundary as well. So just kind of getting in touch with what would be the things that would make me feel safe in this moment and my body are so, so helpful.
So you've touched on this idea of sexual exploration, and I assume that having this base level of safety is really key to actually starting to explore your sexuality a bit more and explore what you and your partner might like as well. So can you just talk to us a little bit about how we could go about a sexual exploration journey?
Yeah. So I love that you mentioned that, because our bodies, again, our body's priority is to keep us safe. And when we don't feel safe, whether that's emotionally, mentally, physically, in all the different ways, it's really hard for us to drop into our pleasure. It's really hard for us to drop into our bodies. And so that's why it's so, so, so important to feel grounded and create safer space as much as you can, so that you can drop into the body and you can have these experiences with your partner. And the best way, obviously, to do that is to have lots and lots and lots of discussions on where your boundaries are, on the things that you love, on the things that you're really curious to try together, the things that you're like, no, this is not something that I'm available for to try. And so just having that out of the way can be really, really helpful. And then also creating language around like safety in the sexual exploration. So having your words, right? Your words pertaining to your red light, your green light, your yellow light, or creating language around what's feeling really good for you, and also creating nonverbal cues as well. So those are some of the elements that can be really, really helpful to understand and know before you jump into a sexual exploration. And essentially, you just want to have no surprises, no too little surprises, and you just want to be really clear, right? And have the opportunity to advocate for the things that you're available for and that you're not. So sexual exploration, something that I really love to share with my couples is it's really fun to create a sexual exploration container outside of the times that you're having sex on the regular. So maybe you're super in the mood and then things are starting to get really hot and heavy and you're like, yes, let's have sex. This is going to be amazing. And then you have your regular routine. But what would it feel like to set some time aside to just explore, right? Set 30 to 40 minutes aside and commit to this 40 minutes as a exploration. So we're going to explore each other's bodies, and we're going to play with different types of touch, different pressure, different speed, different erogenous zones on the body. We're going to play a little bit with body mapping and pleasure mapping, and just take the time to explore each other's bodies. This is so, so, so helpful because our bodies react to pleasure differently every single day. And what we desire in the bedroom can change depending on what the temperature is like in the room, depending on your mood, depending on how hungry you are, how hydrated, like there's so many factors to this. And when we set a time to explore where there's no pressure of having an orgasm, there's no pressure to like end it with anything. There's not really like any goal to have it go a certain way or end a certain way. It's just for the sake of being curious about each other's bodies and what feels good and what doesn't. It's such a great opportunity to explore deeper states of pleasure because now you're doing things so much differently than you are in your regular routine. And you might be exploring different styles of touch, different pressures, different speeds, different tastes, different anything together to see what is going to allow your body to fall even deeper into pleasure.
I love this. It's kind of like going shopping together, trying on a few things and being like, okay, I'm going to wear that to that event later, but I've just tried it on for now. No, I'm not going to do the whole full hair and makeup, get up, glammed for this occasion. This is just the trying on.
Yes, exactly.
But you've dedicated some time to go and explore
wear that
what
thing
you want,
later.
rather than when you know you've got to go to the wedding and you've got to go buy a dress. And
Pressure.
Totally. And it just takes such a huge like pressure off, especially if you're having sex and you're like, oh my God, this spot is so, so good. And then now there's like this pressure to perform, or there's this pressure to kind of figure out what exactly that was, right? But in this time, you're just exploring different ways of touch, and you really get to like hone in and get to almost like study, how do I please my partner? How do I please myself, right? And those are really, really, really helpful ways to just connect deeper without that like performance pressure in the background that sometimes just happens.
Yeah. So Azaria, you're on the Date Forever podcast, and we chat about dating yourself and dating your chosen person for forever. And you touched on it earlier around like dating yourself is not just the bubble baths and retail therapy and treat yourself kind of attitude. It really is about like treating yourself with compassion and kindness in any moment. And sometimes that's around holding self-discipline or boundaries for yourself, around yourself. But then it's also about really deeply getting to know yourself and experiencing joy and pleasure on your own and not contingent to your partner. So I'd love to know, like, from your point of view, what role does masturbation and self-pleasure play in a romantic relationship and in our relationship with ourselves?
I love that so much. I think that oftentimes the way we self-pleasure really reflects our sex life as well. The way that we connect to our bodies can reflect how we connect to our bodies in the bedroom. And so it's such a close mirror of our sex life. And when we connect deeply to our bodies, when we get really, really comfortable with looking and being with our bodies and spending time with our bodies and allowing ourselves to develop this relationship with our own pleasure, right? That is when things are really going to shift in the bedroom and with our partners, because then we drop into a space where we are feeling so deeply empowered around our own pleasure. We are an absolute yes to the embodied sensations that are showing up. We're maybe connecting with our voice, our sound. So there's so much that we can create within our self-pleasure routine, within our own time with ourselves, that is going to change your sex life with your partner in so many incredible ways. And a lot of the times what happens is we really get stuck in the way that we experience pleasure. So maybe some of us have started self-pleasuring when we were teenagers or whenever time. And maybe at that time you're living with your parents and you're like trying to be quiet and you're like trying to do it under the covers and like get it done really quickly. And you're like tensing your whole body. And then, right. And so most of us keep this blueprint in our bodies and we just keep it the rest of our lives. And so we're going into our sex like that. We're going into the sex with the expectations that we're going to orgasm in a certain way, or we're going to have to use that same position to orgasm in a certain way. And so when we get to self-pleasure and maybe get curious what it means to explore our body in different ways and touch our bodies in different ways, we really allow ourselves the opportunity to shift our blueprint and our relationship with our bodies and our orgasm and the sex that we're having. We can really have this opportunity to use self-pleasure not just as something to just get off, but we can use it to experience like so much healing from heartbreak, from not feeling good enough, from not feeling confident. We can use it as an experience to practice like deep embodiment around who we want to be in the bedroom. We can use it to even expand our own orgasmic experiences by creating deeper relationships with our sensations and what's coming up right now, right? And so sometimes what happens is when we're with our partners, we're so focused on our partners, and sometimes it can be really hard to focus on the sensation that wants to come alive during that moment. And so when we practice self-pleasure, we get to spend time with that and we get to expand our orgasms as well.
I love that. Such a, yeah. I liked what you said about the mirroring of your self-pleasure practices, how that can show up in your sex life. If one's like, wham, bam, thank you, get it done, just something that I have to do on my to-do list this week, versus like really intentional, like you've made time for that. and it's something that you're not, I like whether or not you're using external stimulus of like toys or porn or like whatever it might be, and whether or not you can actually just be with yourself and be totally alone, or if you need those things, and maybe why do you want or need those things, and can you evolve that relationship so that you can also evolve your sex life. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
So Azaria, I'd love to know, like, what are the handful of things, tools, tips, resources, practices, things that you recommend to your clients to help them keep that part of their relationship fueled up, that deep intimacy and pleasure?
Mm-hmm. Really simple communication exercises are really great, like regular, just simple things, like at the end of your day, when you're laying down with your partner in the bed, just setting a timer for 10 minutes and asking each other, hey, what would make this day feel complete for you? What do you need to feel complete in this day? And then your partner gets to choose 5 minutes of something that would make them feel complete, whether it's a shoulder rub, or maybe they just want to tell you about their day and have you be fully present, or maybe they just want to be held, or maybe they want, I don't know, to hear 10 compliments about what you love about them. Whatever it is that they need, you get to offer that for them. And you also get to see if you're available for that offer. And if not, you can find a compromise and figure out something else that you're both available for, and then vice versa. And you can just go to bed feeling so good, because it's like you get to practice what it means to state your needs and share your needs and then have it received, and vice versa. And like something like this can make such a huge difference in how you go to bed and you wake up the next day. That's a really, really, really easy and beautiful practice to do. And another one that I really love to offer is to just have connection practices before you have sex. So something really powerful and really simple is like eye gazing. I don't know about y'all, but like something about eye gazing feels way more intimate than sex. Like, I don't know. When somebody like looks me into the eyes for longer than 3 minutes, it's like, okay, now you're just staring into the depths of my soul. Like, this is so intense. And so something like this just before sex is so, so powerful and so intimate. Or even sharing just 5 things that you love about each other before sex, and 5 things that you appreciate about each other. Things like that can really help deepen the intimacy, and also just get these conversations going around sharing our emotional vulnerabilities, and also just sharing our fears that we have, right? And sharing moments where we get to choose whether to be vulnerable or not. And in those moments, even especially when we're communicating with our partners and we're feeling that edge, that moment where we do want to be vulnerable, or maybe we're like arguing and we know like we're taking it a little bit too far, but we're just like going because it's like we're in our story and we're just like, yes, okay, like I'm winning this argument. This is going to be so good. Those moments, it's so good to like call yourself out on that shit, because we're humans, we're messy. Like we're gonna sometimes be stuck in our stories. We're gonna be sometimes stuck in not being vulnerable. We're going to be sometimes stuck in just our story that we want to have, right? And what would it feel like to know and understand that that's going to come up? And what would it feel like to just call yourself out? Be like, wow, you know what? I actually was feeling like I was holding a part of myself back when I was sharing this with you. And I actually want a chance to do it over and say it over and see what it feels like to be vulnerable. And I was wondering if you could hold space for that. Or maybe before in the argument, I totally just wanted to be right. And I already knew that you were right, but I was too ashamed to admit that I was wrong. And I was just really stuck in my own story. So I was wondering if we could have an opportunity to have that conversation again in a different way, right? Like we get to fix the things. We get to choose to do it again. And I think so much of the time, it's like when we have those moments of vulnerability, or when we have those moments where we know we could step into a deeper intimacy, but we're hitting like our intimacy edges and we feel like we're at a glass ceiling, we get to choose to play again, and we get to choose to call ourselves out on it, and it gets to be okay. And we get to hold ourselves in that. Like those are the moments where we really get to practice self-love. Those are the moments where we get to like practice being with those parts of ourselves that maybe are the parts that we just want to control, or we just like would rather, I don't know, not take the step over the edge into intimacy or emotional vulnerability or being wrong or whatever it is, right? It's those moments that we actually get to choose to step deeper in it, and we get to ask our partners if they could hold space for us, and we get to say that it feels fucking edgy and scary. and we get to do it anyways.
Yeah, I love that. And I especially like that question of like, what would help make today feel complete? Because there's so much that's going on in that small exchange, like the opportunity to practice asking for what you want, being both the giver and the receiver, which is not always natural it's not a muscle that everybody has built. So, and then where that goes. But I think just through the lens of like, everything's an experiment. Like we try it. If we like it, we do more of it. If we do less of it.
Absolutely.
So I love that. So Azaria, thank you so much for joining us today and having this conversation about your experience and the work that you do with your clients, and sharing a little bit of a few tools and tips and tricks with our listeners. But to say thank you, we've provided a week of classroom education to a child in Borneo. So this project is really special in Indonesia because it focuses on girls. So quite often girls don't get to go to school. And through this project that we're able to support that happening. So we know that education is so important, which is why we're even having this conversation, but we get to extend that ripple effect. So thank you so much for being part of that.
Oh, thank you so much. I think that's incredible.
No worries. So Azar, if people want to connect with you or learn a little bit more about what you do, how can they do that?
Absolutely. So you can find me at www.azariamenezes.com. If that's too long of a story, just type in www.thepussyfairy.com and you will find me. You can also find me on Instagram at azaria.menezes, and just tune into my podcast as well at Getting Intimate.
Awesome. So many ways to connect with you and so many freebie resources too. So thank you so much for being so generous.
You're welcome. We want to spread some of that pussy magic into everyone's bedroom. So yes.
We love you and we love your mission.
Thank you.
Thanks heaps for joining us. If you love what we're doing here and want more, subscribe to the Date Forever podcast to make sure you never miss an ep. Come and hang out with us and other awesome couples who are fueling up their relationships in the Thriving Couples Collective Facebook group, or check us out at fuelcollective.com.au. Until next time, keep on dating, because better relationships equal a better world.